with students and test takers from all over the world, we realize that almost all non-native speaking test takers find it incredibly hard to improve their verbal score, especially if they have only a few weeks to prepare for the GRE. Now, most students are under the impression that a vocab-heavy test like the GRE is disadvantageous to those test takers who are not native to speaking the language. And many students believe that math is not that much of a concern to them. But having said that, if it is your dream to study in the US, it is inevitable that you take this test and excel at both the math and the verbal sections. And that is why today we're going to answer all of your GRE verbal reasoning questions to help you get over your fear of vocab and the English language and help you increase your verbal score on the GRE. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So the first question that we have for Anuja today is, how many and what type of questions does the verbal reasoning section consist of? This question was asked by Rashmi, Kehinde, Oliyomi, and Devi Pooja. I'm going to hand over to Anuja now.
First off, thanks a lot, Sana, for that wonderful introduction. And thanks to all of the attendees and all of the registrants who've asked these wonderful questions. I'm glad I'm getting a chance to clear a lot of learners' doubts with regard to the GRE, especially the verbal section. Now, there are several learners amongst us here who are still new to the GRE and some learners who have no idea about it in general. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the GRE as a whole and the verbal reasoning section, including the question types. Okay, I'm just going to switch over to a different PowerPoint really quickly because this is to give you an idea of the exam pattern. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, your GRE score is made up of both your verbal score and your quant score. Okay, and this is the breakup of the verbal and quant sections in your GRE. Now, the GRE exam is a 4-hour exam, and it has 4 of these sections along with what is called an AWA section or analytical writing section, where you are expected to write 2 essays. And apart from that, you also have something called a research section. Okay, so your core GRE score is actually only made up of your verbal and quant scores. The analytical writing section is not a part of this GRE score. You would get a score of 0 to 6 on each of those essays, and then the average would be your overall AWA score. And you would have to write 2 essays for 30 minutes each on 2 different topics, analyze an issue and analyze an argument. As I mentioned, apart from this, in addition to all of the sections we've seen so far, you're also going to see either a research section or an unidentified section. Research sections and unidentified sections are going to either be verbal or quant. It's just another typical verbal or quant section. The difference is if it's a research section, you're going to be told that it does not count towards your score. You're going to be told that they're conducting it for research, and it's up to you how seriously you take this section. On the other hand, an unidentified section may appear anytime during your exam, and they will not tell you whether it counts towards your score or not. So if you're not being told, then you have to take it just as seriously. That being said, there's no way to predict whether it is going to be a verbal section or a quant section. So please go in prepared to handle up to 3 sections of each. Now, to get into the detail of each of these, verbal and quant, your verbal score is between 130 and 170 points. And this is just a nice way. Why it starts at 130 is because that way the lowest score you can get is a 260, and that just makes you feel better than if you got 0. But effectively, that's what it means. Put together, you can get a maximum of 340. As I said, 2 verbal sections, each 30 minutes long, containing 20 question types shortly. Apart from that, you also have your quant section. It is a slight technical issue. Just making sure we're coming back online. I'm not sure what the issue is. I think so. Hello? Hello? Okay, I hope everybody can hear me clearly now. Sorry about that, we just had a small technical glitch. Is everybody able to hear us? Yes, okay, so sorry about that interruption. I will get back to the exam pattern right away. Okay. All right, okay, so coming back to the exam pattern, as I said, the quant section has 35 minutes for each section. It's just 5 minutes longer than the verbal, but it's the same number of questions. So that is at least 40 verbal questions per exam and at least 40 quant questions per exam. You may get an additional 20 of either of those, depending on whether you get a research section or an unidentified section. Okay, if you want more details on analytical writing as such, we have conducted several webinars before on analytical writing. So if you want to improve your essay quality, please go ahead and take a look at our YouTube channel, Galvanize Test Prep, and we have 2 or 3 different webinars that we've conducted to help you with that. Okay? Now, a closer look at the verbal reasoning question types for those of you who still need to know about these. There are 3 core types, the first being the text completion type question. In these types, you would get between 1 and say 3 different sentences as a part of the main text, and it would have anywhere between 1 and 3 blanks that you're going to have to fill. Worry not, you do not have to fill the blanks with your own words. They will give you options. It is an objective test as far as the verbal reasoning sections go. So you'll just have to pick the correct answer choice for the blanks. But that being said, this is based totally on verbal reasoning. That is right, it is logic and reasoning. So it does not have anything to do with grammar as such. Okay, you would have to complete the blank with the logic of the sentence rather than try to figure out what the grammar of the sentence is and eliminate options. I'll go a little bit more into this shortly. So apart from text completion, you also have one other very unique type of question on the GRE. It's called the sentence equivalence type. Now these look a lot like text completions in the sense that there is one sentence with a single blank and you have 6 answer choices. But the thing that's different about sentence equivalence is you always have to pick 2 correct answers for these types. No more, no less. Selecting more or less will lead to you losing the entire score. So please be careful. And the 2 answer choices that you pick should bring out similar meanings in the original question stem. So that is the sentence equivalence question type. And finally, the big mammoth of the verbal reasoning question types, we have reading comprehension. Okay, so reading comprehension, as all of you must be familiar with by now, is probably the most challenging part of the verbal reasoning section. But if you need special help with this, I'm going to give you some tips coming up. And also we have conducted other webinars dealing specifically and dedicatedly with reading comprehension. So please take a look at those. So these are the types put together that make the verbal section. And around half of every section is going to be just RC questions. That's right. So if you have 20 questions in a verbal section, around 10 of them are going to be text completion and sentence equivalence types, and the other 10 are going to be reading comprehension. Among the reading comprehension, you also have one additional type called critical reasoning. I'll just explain in this next slide over here. So a closer look at the independent types of questions. As I mentioned earlier, you have sentence equivalence. You have text completion of 3 types with 1 blank, 2 blanks, or 3 blanks. We call them TC1s, TC2s, and TC3s for short. And you have reading comprehension, which is divided into regular passage-based questions. This forms the major chunk of your RC types. So if, say, 10 questions, 8 or 9 of them are going to be this type. There's only going to be 1 or 2 critical reasoning question types per verbal reasoning section. Okay, so it is not given a lot of weightage, but if you're looking to score something really high in your verbal section, it is highly advisable that you ace critical reasoning types soon. In fact, if your reading comprehension skills are pretty good and you feel pretty confident, you won't have a hard time with critical reasoning types because you already have the analytical skills required to tackle those. Okay, so we have the TC types of these kind and the critical reasoning, which is a special type of RC question. How do you distinguish a critical reasoning type from an RC? Well, for one thing, Unlike an RC, there's always going to be one question associated with the CR passage. And another thing, it's going to be a very specific type. So it's going to test you on whether you can identify an assumption made in the passage, whether you can identify a gap in the data, whether you can figure out what the paradox is, something like that. It's going to deliberately test logical skills rather than just your reading skills. Okay, if you need more information or if you need more training on any of these specific types, as I mentioned earlier, on our YouTube channel, you can find dedicated webinars on each of these question types. So please feel free to log in and check those out anytime. They're completely free to access. And we have worked through several questions of each type for you to get an idea of how to crack these different types of questions. Okay, I hope that is a sufficiently clear introduction to the verbal reasoning section of the GRE. If you need more information, please feel free to get in touch with us and we will point you in the right direction.
Okay. So moving on, now that we've covered the basics of what the GRE test is going to be like and what kind of questions you can expect from the verbal section, let's talk a little bit about how you're going to prepare for this, right? So the first question that I have for you, Anuja, and this question was put forth by Darshan, Satpati, and Prakash, is there an ideal way to prepare for the GRE verbal reasoning section?
That's a really good question. I'm glad that people are thinking about how they should start preparation instead of diving in head first and feeling confused later. So let's talk about what a good way to prepare for the verbal reasoning section is. That being said, I think there were a couple of other questions that learners had that were up the same alley. So I would like to address all of these at once.
Okay. Suchita, Bharat, and Pinto wanted to know when and how they should start their prep, and Mamza and Mariam wanted to know, yeah, pretty much the same thing, like if you have any strategies that you can give them to prepare for their verbal section.
Okay, so these are all excellent questions, and I'm glad that learners are thinking about how to set aside time to target their score. And for that, I advise the following steps. The first thing you should do the moment you think of preparing for the GRE is find out where you stand with respect to the GRE right now as you are. Okay, that'll give you an idea of how far you have to go, how much effort you'd have to put in. What are the types of questions that happen to be your weaknesses? What do you need to work on? So Galvanize has a free 65-minute diagnostic test. It emulates one verbal section and one quant section of the actual GRE for you to get an idea of how you would tackle these sections if you were to take the exam today. So please give this a shot, set aside just an hour's time and test yourself. Find out where you stand, okay? We will give you some predicted estimate of how you're gonna do. Now, once you know where you stand, I'm sure all of you have already started dreaming about that university that you want to get into, which means you need to set your target score, okay? Every university has a score range that they're looking for in learners. So please think about what the target score you can aim for is. Make sure this is something that is achievable, all right? Having looked at your diagnostic test result, you would know what you're capable of and how far you have to go. You also, as described in step 3, know how much time you have before you have to take this exam. So based on the time that you have and the target that you want to achieve and where you are right now, you can determine how you want to prepare for the test. And based on all of this, you can prepare a study plan that sets aside the type of time you need. Now, the reason I haven't specified how much time you need to spend is because this varies for every single learner. Not all of us have the same amount of time before the exam, so I can't give you a blanket sense of how much time you should spend. If you have 30 days, obviously, you're going to have to set aside a different kind of timeline. If you have, say, 6 months, that also means something very different. If you're a working professional, you need to handle it differently. If you were a student, again, you would have to balance it with your student life. This differs person to person. And again, if you've done really well on your diagnostic, then the last few steps that you need to take to get to a really high score, it really depends on what kind of learner you are. So if you have any questions regarding how much time to set aside, you can always get in touch. And Galvanize, one of the key plus points of the product is that we try to bring to you at a very affordable price point a way to plan your GRE prep and to guide you every step of the way. We provide every full GRE package learner a personalized study plan based on all of these details that we just looked at. So how do you do on your diagnostic test? What is your target? How much time do you have? What is, the amount of time that you could spend every day? Based on all of this, we prepare a personalized study plan for you. We keep track of how far along you are. We remind you when to take your assessments and what lessons you need to learn at what time in order to get where you want to go. And Galvanize is very personally invested in your success. So if you would like guidance on this, it is I don't just recommend this because it's my company, but because it's something that I believe every learner can really benefit from. Some guidance, and to make sure you don't fall off your track, because that happens a lot to all of us. Okay?
Thank you for that extremely comprehensive answer, Anuja. So I hope all of you have a little more confidence now in knowing how to begin your GRE prep. Let's move on to the next question. So this is an incredibly popular question. A whole bunch of people have asked, Mandeep and Anish being two of them. So the next question has to do with GRE words, right? So they want to know, one, how many GRE words do they need to learn? And two, are there any shortcuts to remembering these words?
Okay, that is the all-time favorite question. I think anytime somebody thinks of the exam, the GRE, they're like, oh my gosh, so many words to learn. Okay, and that does feel like a monumental effort for a lot of our learners to learn so many words. So the GRE doesn't actually, especially the revised GRE as of the last decade, does not set out to test you on your vocabulary specifically. Once upon a time, it was a very vocab intensive exam. Now, it's not that it's trying to be vocab intensive, but the thing is that the GRE is focused very heavily on testing you on academic words, any language that's common in academia. And after all of you are going to be applying for postgraduate or doctoral courses in the US. And they need to know that you are prepared to look at those texts and understand what they're saying, to be able to communicate with other academicians of the same standard. So in order to do that, the GRE does end up testing you on vocabulary, but not intentionally, only for that purpose. Okay, so keep in mind that the actual skill tested on the GRE is your ability to read and understand texts. Now, the words that are included on the GRE, especially the revised edition of the GRE, are all academic words that a learner ought to have encountered by that time in their life. But you probably haven't, because we don't have that kind of exposure, especially as Sana pointed out, in non-native speakers of the language. So what you may need to learn is a ballpark anywhere between, say, 600 and maybe around 1,500 words, depending on where you stand right now. Now, every independent learner, I can't determine how many words you already know for you. That's something only you know, and you probably aren't even aware of that yourself until you test yourself. So, like I said, it can be anywhere between, say, 600 and 1,500 words. And there is no real shortcut to remembering words, but there are some very clear-cut techniques for learning words effectively in such a way that you remember them the next time that you need to. Okay, so that being said, I highly recommend Galvanize's Vocabulary app. It's a free app. You can download it both for the iOS and for Android. The reason I recommend it is because a lot of thought has been put into exactly learners like you who need to learn a bulk of words, but need to learn it in specific contexts that helps you really remember. So the effort that we have put into developing this is we've given every word a little story. We've given every word images. So please give the app a shot. It is designed to help you get there for the GRE, right? Okay, so it will test you, it will present the word to you, it will make you learn, and it will test you again and again until you've really mastered it. So what we aim for is a fun way to learn a lot of words in a short amount of time. So please do give it a shot. It's just for your pleasure. In fact, we hope that you enjoy using this app. A lot of our learners have actually enjoyed it. And like I said, it's free, so please try that. That said, we've also conducted a webinar prior to this that is dedicated to vocabulary learning. So please give that webinar a glance. We've looked at about 7 different techniques for learning words, including several techniques you may be aware of, like flashcards, but also other ones like visual cues and mnemonics. So take a look at this video if you're looking for new techniques, because old ones are just not working for you. Okay, now that said, in case you want to try out what we consider the most helpful way to learn a word, you need to tie that word to a memorable context. And that is why I recommended our app just a few minutes ago, is because every word comes with a little story. But if you don't if you want to try it on your own, please learn the word with a memorable context, something that you will never forget, right? If you know somebody who talks a lot and you learn the word loquacious. Loquacious comes from the root word loqua, which means talkative, right? Lots of words. You can link that word loquacious with that person, right? In fact, you don't even have to link it with a person. You can link it with somebody fictional whose name starts with the same letter. Loquacious Lily. For all you know, this is going to come really, really helpful when you need to remember it in the right context. So just think about it that way. Link it with a memorable context. The next most important thing is to test yourself very frequently. If there are words that you just don't seem to learn even with a memorable context, put it somewhere in front of you where you will see it very often. Write it down in a flashcard and put it on your table. Flip it over every day the moment you wake up. Remind yourself what that word means. See if that works. The next thing is, of course, to use the word whenever you can. I know you're going to think, what will my friends think? They're going to see me as a geek or a nerd or something. But at the end of the day, when you're over there in your dream university, you know, living your success, that's not even going to matter. So please use the words when you can. It's also going to help you a lot in your academic life. I can definitely promise you that much. Okay, so please do try out our app, which is designed for this purpose, and check out our other webinar for vocab building techniques.
Wonderful. Okay, now that we've covered vocab, right? The next, question that we got from a lot of students, including Prachi and Abhishek, was what areas do they need to focus on to score a 160, and what material do they use for this?
Okay, that is also a very good question. And a 160 plus on verbal is, for some, an ambitious score, but for those of you looking to get into top universities, that's like a must. So let's take a closer look. Okay, now my first recommendation to all of you would be to improve your accuracy on the discrete type questions. Now, just to give you a little clarity, the term discrete is used to refer to the text completion and sentence equivalence question types. Now, the word discrete itself means something that's independent or separated from other things. So the reason we use it to refer to these types is because, unlike reading comprehension, which is tied to a passage, these stand alone. So they're discrete types. Improve your accuracy on discrete types. They take the least amount of time for you to actually solve them. And so your first few minutes of the test should be focused on acing all of these. So once you improve your accuracy solely on the discrete types, you will bring yourself into a 140 to 150 range comfortably. After that, you need to start reading. Practice reading, and not just reading, but reading with interest, okay? If you just invest a little bit in every one of those RC passages, you would find that they're actually not as unapproachable as we think. Don't think of it as another dry piece of text, okay? I'm gonna look into, I'm going to talk about reading comprehension shortly, because I do remember Sana mentioning there were learners asking about that. But please get a lot of practice reading. There are a lot of reading materials out there online. Pick up a trustworthy English newspaper, flip over to the editorial section, and pore over those really thoughtfully written columns. Okay, those are the type of questions those are the type of articles that really engage the reader. It's not just giving you information, but giving you ideas, raising questions. That's the kind of thing you need. That's the kind of skill you need to develop for GRE RCs. Next thing is, please pay attention to the question type instructions. Okay, we've seen a lot of learners actually miss a lot of points because they missed instructions. Like I said, for sentence equivalence types, always pick 2 correct answer choices. For text completion types, make sure that you've picked an answer for each of the blanks. Missing out one of these, you lose the entire point. For reading comprehension questions, there are some where you have to select multiple correct answers. So don't miss those. Read the instructions. Be very careful about that. Okay? Those are some really simple points that we do have learners miss out on. Our recommended materials, I've already mentioned Galvanize's Vocab app for vocab building. We also have a free GRE app for you to access with a few hundred practice questions, both in Quant and in Verbal. That includes RCs, discrete types, everything. So please just give the app a shot. Go through some of the question types and take a look at, and the app will also track your progress. It will give you a predicted score based on how many answers you get right. So this is, as I said, it's a free app, so it's definitely worth getting some extra practice on the go with you on your phone. A must-have is the ETS official guide to the revised GRE, okay? So please get yourself a copy, or if your friend has a copy, take a look, because this has all of the questions, all of the question types. It even has a couple of mock tests at the end, at least the basic practice that you need to tackle the GRE, and all the information about the exam would be contained here. So it's kind of like a Bible for a lot of learners. So please do have access to this book. I would advise reserving the practice tests for the end of your preparation. Also, our YouTube channel is full of webinars dedicated to every single verbal question type. So we have like an individual webinar for TC2s and individual webinars for TC3s, individual webinars even for the critical reasoning type. I think 2 or 3 webinars on RCs. So please give those a shot. It's like a little mini classroom for you to get acquainted with those question types. I see that one of our attendees has just asked if we could give some examples. We'll send you some links that'll give you an idea of what these question types look like, and you can get more familiar. Okay.
All right. Evelyn wants to know if there's going to be a webinar on comprehension. I assume she means reading comprehension. Evelyn, Anuja has actually already conducted a webinar on this. Please do go ahead and check out our YouTube channel. I'm sure you'll find the webinar on there. Okay, moving on to the next question. Okay, so this has to do with discrete type questions, which Anuja has already explained include TC and SE. The question is there a key, first of all? And if there is, what is the key to cracking these questions?
Okay, I'm really glad that we got a question of this type, because the answer is there is a kind of key to answering these question types. And I'm just going to walk you through some of the steps that we always advise learners to follow when they're working on the discrete type questions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, discrete type questions are limited to a maximum of, say, 3 or 4 sentences with multiple blanks in them. And the GRE Verbal Reasoning section is all about logical reasoning power. So what they're testing is, I mean, vocabulary is just on the side. You do need to know all of the words. You do need to know their nuanced meanings, because sometimes words have more than one meaning that you need to be familiar with. But once you're past that stage, that's not enough for the GRE Verbal Reasoning. What you need to do is apply your mind. What you need to do is read the sentences very carefully and think about the logic that it's trying to convey. Once you have read the question carefully, you need to identify key words and clues that'll tell you something about what goes in the blank. Now, I assure you that all the information you need for the blank is already contained in the question. You're never going to get an answer in the blank that is utterly irrelevant to what this question has already provided you. There's going to be a key word. There's going to be some hint as to what goes to fill in that blank. Sometimes it's going to be a word opposite to what's been explained in the sentence. It depends. If you see a contrast word like however or although, that could be possible. Sometimes it could be similar to some other concept discussed in the question. So step 2 is very, very critical. I would say step 2 is actually the key. It's for you to look at the sentence carefully and identify what the keywords are that tell you more information about what goes in the blank. As I've said earlier, we have conducted 2 or 3 webinars on these discrete question types, showing you very clearly how you can identify keywords. So please take a look at those webinars and understand how to tackle these types. Okay, another thing that we highly recommend to learners is before you look at the answer options, in fact, don't look at the answer options until you've crossed step 3, is come up with your own answer. Please come up with your own answer for the blank before you look at the choices, based on step 2. Once you've got the keywords, once you've got the clues, fill in the blank on your own with something that is precise as possible. And then you move on to step 4. I'm sorry, it says step 3 here. That's a typo, but it's step 4. You need to then choose the right answer by the process of elimination. Okay, take the answer you came up with, match it against the different answer choices, eliminate the ones that don't work, and choose the one that does work. Okay, I can't stress this enough. Do not choose an answer and then forget to look at the other options. It's very, very risky if you don't eliminate every single option. We've had a lot of learners think that they're right, just ignore the other types, only to have been proven wrong. Okay. And the last thing you should do is, of course, plug in the choice that you picked and see if it works. In case it doesn't, I don't want you to try plugging in every other answer choice and getting confused. The reason I asked you to look at step 3 and do this is so that you don't waste time. Time is very precious. As I've already said, we've conducted a lot of webinars earlier. One is dedicated to how you should save your time and prioritize the different question types. So please take a look at that to see how much time you should give for each option, for each question type. Now, what you need to do if your answer doesn't fit in the blank very well is to go back to step 3 or step 2 and see if you missed something in the sentence. This means your logic for what you came up with as the answer is what's wrong. It's not that the answer choice is incorrect because it doesn't match what you came up with. Maybe what you came up with missed something in the sentence. So please go back and rethink the logic and see if you've missed something. Okay?
Wonderful. So the next question, and again, this is another incredibly popular one. This is about reading comprehension. I'm sure you've gotten this a lot. So the question is, 1, how do I understand the crux of long passages? And a lot of people also wanted to know how, I think that's the next question, right? Yeah. How do they maximize the time that's given to them with regards to the RC passages?
Okay, I can see why a lot of learners struggle with RCs because, as I said, it is the mammoth of the GRE. It is the most difficult question type category to handle if you haven't had a lot of experience reading. And our recommendation is, if you're really, really struggling, if you find that you can't even answer 2 or 3 of these right, you need to start from the basics. Start small. Take it one sentence at a time. I know that this is going to take time. And it is very time-consuming in the initial stages, but doing this is the best way to really understand an RC. Start small, go one sentence at a time, and identify the relationship between the sentences and paragraphs as you read. Okay, I think a lot of learners miss out on the meaning of a passage, mostly because they're not thinking about what they're reading. When you're done with a sentence, don't just move on to the next one blindly. Kind of sum up for yourself what you have just read so you understand what's being conveyed. Once you read the next sentence, again, stop, pause, think about what you've just read. How is it related to the sentence you read right before? The moment that you start constantly drawing the connection between these sentences, you are establishing the crux of the passage in your mind. Summarize every sentence, link them with one another. As you proceed, you're going to have a big picture of a paragraph. Move on to the next paragraph. Once you have the big picture of the next paragraph, think about the relationship between the 2 paragraphs. How are they connected? What aspect of the main idea are they both talking about? I assure you that all of the GRE RC passages are very carefully prepared content, and they have the kind of text that you are going to encounter in your academic life once you go to that dream university abroad. So you do need to accustom yourself to reading this kind of content and understanding it. You have to only take it slowly and one sentence at a time. Please do not think, I need to crack this exam. Think, I need to prepare for a life at the US. I need to prepare for an academically enriching life. And for that, the GRE is not just a gate to cross. It's a stepping stone. It's preparing you for what's lying ahead. So please approach it in that sense. Every RC passage has a story in it. In fact, you can actually learn very interesting new things if you focus and read these passages. In my time teaching RC passages to a lot of learners, I have picked up a lot of very interesting things about life, about various subjects, just by focusing on these RC passages. And I can promise you, I am not an engineering major, and I am definitely not a biology major, but all of these passages have been very approachable for me as long as I focused and tried to approach it with an open mind. So the next question was how to maximize the usage of limited time for reading RC passages. I want you to keep in mind that the GRE is testing you on all possible skills that pertain to reading comprehension. There is no shortcut to cracking an RC passage. Don't look for an easy solution. What you do need to do is read, practice reading often, and be very patient. You can't crack an RC without paying attention. You can't crack an RC without investing in it. And this is a key that we found helping a lot of learners is please note your mistakes. As you're practicing with various RC types, try to note down the mistakes that you have been making. What was your problem? How did you miss this question? What happened there? Did you fail to identify something in the passage? Did you misread the answer option? Did you miss what the question was asking you for? The moment you start writing down your mistakes, you become conscious of them and avoid repeating them. So please give this a shot and try to apply yourself when you're reading RC passages. Now, if you're looking for an idea of how to manage your time on the actual GRE with regard to RC passages, our tips and techniques for last minute tips and techniques webinar conducted a few weeks ago on the verbal reasoning section gives you a very clear idea of how much time you should be spending on not only every single question type, but on the RC passage reading itself, depending on the length of the passage. So please give that a glance, take a look at that webinar, and see how much time you should be spending on a short RC passage versus a long RC passage. How much time you should be spending on each question on that RC passage, and how you should dedicate your time to the various discrete types. And most importantly of all, in your 30-minute slot, how do you tackle these? In what order? All of that is described very clearly. I've even used visuals, so please go ahead and take a look. I hope that will be helpful for you to understand this.
Thanks for that, Anuja. Okay, so now we have a couple of slightly unique questions for you. Okay, the first is from Shitu. So she wants to know if she's aiming for 165 in the verbal reasoning section. In the verbal reasoning section. 1, how many words does she need to memorize to achieve this? And 2, what is the best method to memorize these words in just 2 months?
Okay, that is a good question. A 165 is a pretty ambitious verbal reasoning score. As I mentioned earlier, more than just your target, it also depends on where you stand right now and how many words you've already learned for the GRE. If you're standing at like a 155 or almost a 160, you do still have a bit of a climb, but it probably means that you're a bit comfortable with learning words. And I would actually highly recommend our app for you because we cover a lot of words in the app. I think about 1,500 or more words. Most of them are GRE oriented too. They do appear on, they're the type that appear on the exam. And it'll test you very regularly on the different words. In fact, you also have a way to sort out what words you already know. So that'll give you an idea of how many more you do have still to learn. And for a 165, you will have to work on your vocabulary because sentence equivalence types and sometimes even RCs do have some high-level vocabulary in them and can be quite demanding. My tip for you would be please focus on the secondary meanings of words, not just the primary meanings when you're learning them, okay? Don't just learn one aspect of a word. The moment you learn a word, you want to commit as much of it to your understanding as possible, which means what are the different applications of that word? Where are the different contexts in which it can be used? Learn about all of these. A helpful technique is to go to word roots because they help you tackle multiple words at the same time with 1 or 2 roots. As I mentioned earlier, it depends on where you are or where you stand right now. But if you may have anywhere between say 600 and about 1,500 words to learn for the GRE. So take a couple of tests and see where you stand. Sentence equivalence types especially are vocab intensive. So you can try to test yourself independently on those question types to see how you fare. If you're missing the answer choice because of a failure in figuring out the logic, then it may not be a vocab issue. But if you just fail to know the meaning of a word, that'll give you an idea of how far you have to go. I hope that answers that question.
Okay. The next question, Anuja, is from, hang on, let me just, where is the question? All right, I'm unable to find who I mean, I'm not going to tell you right now who answers the question, but the question is basically, can you get into the top 50 universities with a low GRE score?
Okay, well, I have to say, the GRE is a standardized test. It is a way for the universities to understand where you stand among all of the other applicants who are applying for a particular course. So I have to say it is going to be pretty tough to get into a really good university with a low score. That being said, if you have an outstanding profile and you've done a lot of project work, that may help. If you have a really good statement of purpose, if you have a lot of other work to show them to prove your mettle, that may help and work. But the reason that the GRE is so important for getting into universities is because the universities don't really have a way of judging how good a good GPA is, right? They don't set the standard of the GPA that you have. You've earned it from somewhere else. They're not able to judge how good that is. The GRE is a way for them to know exactly how much you know or how skilled you are at reading, logic, analyticals, all of that. And it's a way that they can know where all learners stand. It's like an equal platform. So I can't stress enough the importance of a good GRE score. So if you have a low score, I would recommend trying to give it a little more time, practice a bit more, and bring it up to at least a mediocre score or higher. The higher your score, obviously, the much better your chances, because it's a very impressive part of your application. That being said, if you're looking to get into top universities, they will expect a relatively high GRE score. They will expect that learners are going to have these skills honed, all sharpened in order to tackle courses at such a prestigious and well-developed location for courses. So you do need to be prepared for that. Please work on this. Remember, the GRE is not testing subject knowledge. So what you need to do is hone your skills. If you keep that in mind, you should be able to tackle this a bit better.
All right. The next question, Anuja, again, this was a question I was asked a lot actually. How do I incorporate advanced vocab while writing a passage? Also, is it important that I do? Is it necessary to use, large words, slightly more complicated words while writing an AWA passage?
This is actually an excellent question. I'm really thankful to the learner who asked about this. In fact, if you're talking about the analytical writing section for which you have to write a couple of essays, you don't actually need a very high vocabulary for that at all. They're not looking for your knowledge of vocabulary or how well you can use very complicated words. In fact, I would even recommend that if you're not comfortable with these high-level vocabulary words, don't use them. Because even accidentally using them in an incorrect context will stand out very obviously to the person who's grading your test. And they're going to know right away that you weren't very sure about this word, and that is going to affect the quality of your response. So unless you just are naturally used to using these high-level vocab words, I would even advise you to avoid it and go for something that expresses very clearly what you want to say. So in AWA, they are not looking for fancy language. What they're looking for is clarity of expression, clarity of thought, and clarity of analysis. So what you're trying to do is very neatly structure what you want to say to convey everything in the most efficient way. So it may even work for you that you avoid complex high vocab words. That being said, if you're comfortable with them and you've got a very reliable teacher telling you this is the right usage, then it is okay to go ahead and use those words as long as you're confident about them. You can incorporate these words, but like I said, once you know what the word really means, once you've seen it in enough context, then that'll tell you, that'll be a good indication of when you should be using it. But only if you really start thinking in that language. But keep in mind, it is not necessary for the AWA section at all.
Okay, wonderful. Now that we've covered that question, okay, so this question has been asked by Subankar and a couple of other attendees today. One, which books should I use while preparing for the GRE/TOEFL? And the second is, if a student prepares for the GRE, right, would that make tackling the TOEFL exam easier?
Those are both excellent questions. One, the books that you should use while preparing for the GRE and the TOEFL, like I mentioned earlier, please refer to the official guides. The ETS official guide for the GRE and the TOEFL are both very reliable, and they will tell you everything you need to know about the exam. That said, if what you're looking for is more than just practice questions and an introduction, if you're looking for guidance, then I would highly recommend enrolling with an institution or any of our online courses to give you that guidance for these exams. The second question was excellent. Actually, if you're very comfortable with the reading comprehension type questions in the GRE, the TOEFL is going to be a lot easier for you because the skill level of the reading comprehension is actually slightly lower on the TOEFL. However, please be prepared to tackle much longer passages, and the TOEFL is dedicated to testing more basic reading comprehension skills and more thoroughly. The GRE is not focused on your understanding of the language alone. It's focusing a lot on your reasoning skills, your logic skills, your analytical skills, whereas TOEFL is focusing very dedicatedly on your understanding of the English language. Okay, so it is going to focus more on the meanings of words in particular contexts, on inferences, on factual questions, on summarizing, and various other question types. So while being comfortable with the GRE will definitely help you on the TOEFL, that's not all the TOEFL tests you on. You are also tested on speaking and listening and writing in very different ways. You don't have speaking or listening on the GRE. You do have writing, but writing on the TOEFL, yes, that does depend on your level of comfort with the language. Whereas in the GRE, again, they're looking for your analytical skills and your ability to express your thoughts clearly. The TOEFL is looking for fluency also. Recommended books, definitely the official guides. If you need further guidance, please think about signing on for any particular course. Our courses are great for guiding you through all the steps that you need to get a good score on the GRE.
So the next question, this question was asked by Agozip. So he wants to know how to deal with inference and paradox type questions in the RC.
I'm glad that you're asking about independent question types, which means you're working on identifying your specific weaknesses. I would like to identify a difference between the inference and the paradox type. The paradox type is actually one of the critical reasoning question types. So I wouldn't say it's a very high priority unless you're really focusing on getting a perfect score. But I would focus heavily on scoring, on getting those inference type questions right. For this, however, I would need more time than we have at present. So please go ahead and take a look at our webinar on the various RC question types. It is available on our YouTube channel. You can watch it anytime that is comfortable for you. We have dealt with the inference type question independently and also a passage with inference type questions also. So you can take a look at that and get some more clarity there.
Okay. Another extremely popular question was, what if I'm weak in grammar? How do I go about tackling the verbal section then?
Okay, so you don't actually need to be very confident about your grammar to deal with the verbal sections, although you will have to work and hone your grammar a bit to handle the analytical writing section on the GRE. The GRE is, verbal section itself is completely objective. So you won't actually have to write any sentences or anything like that. That being said, I wouldn't really recommend preparing for all of these exams without thinking about improving your grammar. However, for the TOEFL or IELTS or any of these exams that do test your fluency of the language, this is a very important aspect. And to those learners looking for improving these, it's very hard to find a good course that tries to tackle grammar in a comfortable way. I'm pleased to say that Galvanize is trying to put together a very affordable and helpful course right now that'll help you with both English grammar and with reading comprehension to get you where you need to be for exams like the GRE and the TOEFL. So please sit tight, it's coming soon. We're hoping to make an announcement very shortly on that. But if you need to work on grammar, please look up some of the basics online. Work on your really basic sentence structures, right? I figure out what we mean by subject and predicate and very consciously incorporate trying to speak complete sentences, grammatically complete sentences. Make sure all of your sentences have subjects and predicates. Test out some of the online writing tools that will identify some mistakes that you're making, and this will really help. But you need to be very conscious, and you also need to take a lot of effort to fix whatever mistakes you're making. A big problem with a lot of learners is that they don't spend enough time really going back and paying attention to their mistakes and fixing them. So it really helps. Get some guidance from a teacher of some kind or an instructor. Identify your mistakes and really seriously work on fixing them. Grammar is not that difficult. At the end of the day, it is just structure. If you get grammar in one language, it's not too hard to get in another if you give it a little bit of time and get it explained to you in a simple way. We're working on putting together a course that'll help you do exactly this very soon. So I hope to see you there.
Okay. We have time for just 2 more questions, unfortunately. So this question has to do with SE and TC type questions, I'm guessing. How do I pick the right answer when a lot of the options seem like they would be equally appropriate?
Yeah, we've actually seen a lot of our own students face this struggle. This is after you have done most of your preparation. This seems to be the last big obstacle, right? You have eliminated 3 out of 5 options, and you're stuck with those last 2, and you just don't know which one is the right fit, and that can be the most difficult part. But keep in mind, this is precisely what the GRE is trying to pitch against you. This is precisely what they're meaning to test. And at the end of the day, one of those options will not fit the logic of the sentence. As I mentioned earlier with the key steps for cracking discrete type questions, what you need to do is focus on the logic of the sentence. What makes the most sense? What really fits in this context? What do I have a clue for? You will find that usually the incorrect option just does not have a clear enough context to be talked about. But to feel more confident about this, you do need to work on your vocabulary and learn all of the secondary meanings of words to help you. Okay? So please do work on this. Practice identifying the logic of the sentence. Use the process of elimination. That will help you.
All right. The last question for the day, Anuja, is, will learning solely the meanings of words be enough for the GRE Verbal?
This is actually a very curious question because usually learners are trying to get around learning words. But in a basic way, if you're very, very thorough with your vocabulary building, then yes, learning the meanings of words is quite sufficient for the GRE Verbal. But keep in mind that the entire test is all about reasoning. It's all about understanding the logic of sentences and paragraphs and passages. So once you've mastered independent words, what you need to move on to is understanding how those words come together to make meaning in large sentences, in complex sentences, and then how those sentences relate to one another. So if this is your weakness, this is something you should work on top of learning the meanings of words. But if you're comfortable with reading, then yes, please do focus and develop your vocabulary. That'll help you a lot on the GRE Verbal.